As Singapore's national vaccination drive continues, some political leaders are stressing the need to make decisions based on science. Last Friday, Senior Minister Teo Chee Hean, who is also Coordinating Minister for National Security, had a Facebook post where he said we should focus on the science and take the advice of our medical experts and decide what is the appropriate action based on our public health needs. On Monday, Speaker of Parliament Tan Chuan Jin also wrote on Facebook that there are those who are seeking to mislead and misinform for political reasons. There are those who promote different beliefs because they are ideological about vaccines. There are also those who believe in other approaches. As infectious diseases expert, has spoken up against vaccine misinformation as well. In a lengthy Facebook post titled "Why Fake Science and Anti-Vaccine Groups Are Dangerous in a Pandemic," clinician researcher at the National Centre for Infectious Diseases, Associate Professor David Lai, said he's seeking to correct certain messages and petitions making the rounds online. Among other things, Professor Lai was referring to an open letter by 12 doctors last month, urging the government to give children here the Sinovac vaccine, as well as comments by private cancer specialist Dr. Oon Chong Jin, who claimed that the Pfizer vaccine is useless and obsolete because of mutations, and an online petition calling for those under 20 years old to not get vaccinated. Prof. Lai said all these claims are wrong, and he joins me now to share more. Professor, welcome to the show. Why did you want to write a Facebook post about this? Do you feel more compelled to do it because the claims were made by members of the medical community?
Thank you, Haryanto. You see, vaccination is a critical component of our COVID battle plan. It's part of, test, trace, and isolate, mask, and social distancing. And we're very lucky to have access to so many effective COVID vaccines. As a small country in the face of global shortage, we're also very lucky to have access to two highly effective and safe vaccines, Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna. Now, there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy. We know that from the start. And there's been a lot of groundwork to educate the community done by many groups of people. So when these doctors started spreading the messages and the petitions, making false statements about the vaccines, it is very, very worrisome because doctors are well trusted by the community. So there will be people who should get the vaccines who may decide against it.
Professor, your post has more than 1,000 shares. What sort of reactions or feedback have you received, particularly from your peers?
By and large, the feedback, at least on my Facebook, has been positive. I'm heartened by the fact that many people share my concern. However, I did notice quite a few people who came to my Facebook usually to challenge me about certain pieces of information. Now, there is certain common thread about it. They often quote dubious sources from the internet. And in fact, there's a common thread. I've also heard from my colleagues in other countries. There is that Belgian veterinary doctor, there is a Canadian veterinary doctor, there's also that French Nobel laureate. And the other thing about these people is that they also often misinterpreted scientific information. There was this particular study from the Salk Institute in the United States that looked at the spike protein potentially causing heart inflammation in COVID infections. The conclusion of the authors is in fact that vaccination can protect us from spike protein damage to the blood vessels from COVID. And yet, these people go around saying that the spike protein from the vaccines will harm us. And now, I'm actually very thick-skinned, and I don't get upset by people that I don't know. My plan and my aim is not to argue with these people. My aim is to educate the public so that they will learn to recognize this misleading information, because I'm quite sure this won't be the last pieces of messages and petitions that will go around.
Right. Professor, there are concerns about children getting the COVID-19 vaccine. Besides the open letter by the 12 doctors and the online petition, there have been several queries as well made to the Straits Times from concerned parents about Singapore vaccinating kids between 12 and 15 years old. Now, these concerns mainly stem from WHO not recommending vaccinating children currently, as there isn't enough evidence. Where do you stand on this?
Well, until now, children are not at high risk of severe COVID. We know that. WHO has to prioritize vaccine supply to developing countries. Now, US and UK, which are more similar to us, have now approved the vaccination for teenagers. So, but I think the concern of the parents are valid, and we should address it. And the important thing is now we have clinical trial data from Pfizer, from Moderna, which have been published. Even Sinovac has announced that its trial has been completed. So should we vaccinate or not? So let's go through a few points of why we should vaccinate and what are the risks. Now, number one is that we want to achieve herd immunity. And herd immunity is especially important to be as high as possible in the face of a more transmissible variant, such as the Delta variant. And there will be some elderly who cannot be vaccinated for whatever reason. So we shouldn't, children and teenagers shouldn't be the weak link for us to achieve herd immunity. Now, the other thing is that while young people don't get very sick, they can still be infected. The amount of virus in them is equally high as adults, and they can transmit to their parents or their grandparents who may not be vaccinated for whatever reasons, because people make decisions for themselves, right? Now, the other thing about young people is that they can get sick, especially if they got medical problems or if they're overweight. And if you do get an infection, there's still the complications of long COVID. Now, long COVID is basically, chronic symptoms after the infection, and overseas been reported to be in the range of about 30 to 50%. So there's really many reasons why young people, children, teenagers now and children later should be vaccinated. And what are the risks then? We know from the two trials that the vaccines available currently are safe. Okay, we will not use a vaccine that is deemed unsafe. There is a standard vaccine development plan that the companies and the regulators follow in terms of monitoring for side effects. Currently, there are some reports of heart inflammation from US and Israel, for example. In fact, a report just came out from US a few days ago. The rate of this heart inflammation is actually lower than a background rate. In fact, there's always heart inflammation that occurs every day. So the doctors that treat them know about it. And we have checked, the rates reported so far in the US are lower than the background rate. So we cannot be sure that these are really due to the vaccines, but of course, it is something that everyone will monitor and investigate. The other good things about this is that from the report, they seem to be very mild and can be easily treated, and all the young people who have this recovered. So it is something that the risk is not high. It is highly effective. And therefore, my position on this is that in order for us to reach herd immunity, such that we can contain the outbreak and regain our life, I think young people should be vaccinated.
There's also debate on the use of Sinovac and it being considered safer because it uses a more traditional vaccine technology versus the newer mRNA technology. Now, this was also brought up in the 12 doctors' open letter as well. Professor, could you explain why you said in your post that a traditional vaccine like Sinovac is not necessarily safer?
Well, I actually didn't say that in the sense that it is not safer. what I'm trying to point out is the misleading information that is being spread about mRNA vaccines. So they said quite a few things, right? They say that the mRNA can be integrated in our genes. They say that it can do terrible things to us, such as fertility, such as the heart. And they also say that the mRNA vaccines don't work against the variant, which is plainly not true. And the Sinovac, they say that the Sinovac vaccine works against the variant better than our vaccine. And I cited scientific data to show that all these statements they made in the messages, in the petitions, are just not true. And people should be stating facts and not untruth. Now, all vaccines that are currently available are effective in preventing severe COVID. We are very lucky. And which vaccines are chosen by individual countries are dependent on many, many factors. So we are certainly not saying that Sinovac will not be approved in Singapore, right? The government has said many times that HSA is awaiting replies from Sinovac about their query. And once this information request has been provided, we should allow HSA time to review them and make an independent assessment. HSA should not be pressured by these doctors, by petitions, to make a decision in a rush.
Another argument against mRNA vaccines is that they alter human DNA and weaken the immune system, and the effects will only be felt 20 to 30 years later. Professor, can you weigh in on these claims?
So these people, and in fact, it's not unique to these doctors as well as some social entrepreneurs in Singapore. They basically quoted a study from the US. Even before the study was published, there's a lot of critique. And since then, other scientists have shown that this is actually an artifact of the laboratory methods that's used. Essentially, there's no evidence that mRNA vaccines can be integrated into the human genome. Number one is that study is studying COVID infections. It's the virus RNA, not the mRNA from the vaccine. Now, mRNA vaccines development has been very challenging for a long time because if you read any reputable journals or textbook, they will tell you that it's very unstable. And one of the major breakthrough in the recent few years is this thing called liquid nanoparticle. So it's basically a fat carrier envelope to hold the mRNA, allows it to be injected in our cells. And once it's injected, the mRNA can be released, and then it will instruct our cells to make the spike protein. From the studies performed by Moderna and Pfizer, it does not last very long at all in our body. It is gone in a few days. And what is left really is the immune response to the spike protein that continues to mature and grow stronger and protect us from infection. Now, these vaccines are meant to enhance our immune system to protect us from infections. I'm really not aware of why people think it will weaken our immune system. As to the thing about 30 years later, how do we even attribute something that happens in 20, 30 years later to the vaccines? The thing about vaccines development is that it's not a new science. There are a lot of vaccines used in children. There is a set rule books that companies and regulators follow in terms of doing clinical trials, in terms of assessing for safety and monitoring from side effects after we start using it in children. And so I'm not sure why people are so worried. We have one of the most robust regulator in the world, HSA, and I have full faith in the processes.